Okay, we're live. We're recording. Not live, but you know. If at any point you want to stop and reframe something that you've said or you don't like the way you said it, we can go back and ask a question again and start over. I do all the tech myself, so
Okay.
I can edit out whatever.
Okay. I
You know,
appreciate
you
that.
sneeze, you cough, you something, you know, it's, I can always edit stuff out.
Okay.
In fact, the the only guests to really take advantage of that were my two sisters. Which was the last episode, episode 18. They didn't want to use their last names because they didn't want people to know that they were my sisters. They didn't
Okay.
want their patients to know who they were. It was very funny. So they're just first names, they're not last names.
Okay.
But they kept stopping and starting, and it was funny. All right. All right. I'm going to set my timer here. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Permission to Heal. I am Marcy Brockman, and I am thrilled that you're here. For this episode, we have Larry Doochin. He is an author, entrepreneur, and devoted husband and father, a survivor of harrowing childhood sexual abuse. He traveled a long journey of emotional and spiritual healing and developed an in-depth understanding of how our beliefs create our reality. In the business world, he has worked for or been associated with enterprises from small startups to multinational corporations. He is the founder of HUSO Sound Therapy, which delivers powerful healing benefits to individuals and professionals worldwide. In everything Lawrence does, he strives to serve a higher good. In his new book called A Book on Fear, Feeling Safe in a Challenging World, he maps out a heartfelt method for overcoming fears and bad memories. Drawing on his own healing journey as well as psychology, science, and spiritual approaches, he offers the steps to reconnect with our hearts. Welcome, Lawrence. Lovely to,
Hey,
to meet
hey,
you.
it's nice to meet you, Marcy. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure, my pleasure. I think it was your publicist who found me somehow.
Yes.
It's so organic how these things happen. It's just suddenly your name's in my inbox. And then she sent me a copy of your book, which I loved. I poured through that, and you see I have post-it notes in it because I was
Thank
so
you.
excited to remember stuff.
Thank you.
So we're gonna get into it. Before we do so, I usually, my little format here is to do these little 6 quick questions and let us get to know you a little bit on a personal level. So what 6 words would you use to describe yourself?
I'd say grateful and spiritual, open-hearted, a servant, persistent, logical.
It's a good list. Varied list. Interesting. And
Yeah.
having read your book, I think that makes sense. Number 2, what is your favorite way to spend a day?
Definitely being in nature, being out in the outside in the woods, ideally, somewhere like that.
Do you live near the woods?
I actually do live. We back up to like a national park traceway, and there's a path that basically I can get to within about 10-15 minute walk that's in the middle of the woods. So that's nice.
Nice, nice. Years ago, when my children were little, our house, our backyard ended, and then the woods began, and there was like a little chain link fence between with a gate. And my kids, they were like 5 and 8, went exploring, not realizing how soon it was going to get dark, and they got lost.
Oh wow,
And we had no idea where they were for like an hour. They were missing, and the whole neighborhood was like combing the area looking for them. Oh, that was
that's
terrifying.
scary.
It
Yeah.
was terrifying for me, terrifying for them. What made me think of that when you said that? I have no idea. Triggered. Anyway, what is your favorite childhood memory?
I'd say basically just some of the vacations we took before my parents got divorced. Like I remember one vacation going to Jamaica, and I was probably about 6, and we were staying in a place. We had a cook, and she had a daughter. Just playing with her, and just just some of those good times.
We totally froze. Are you there? No.
Yeah, I'm here.
All right. Well, it froze on my end.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but the sound you look like, stop action like animatronic.
Okay.
All right. Well, let's keep going. Um, why don't we take that question again? Just because it got chopped in the middle of the Jamaica
Okay.
thing.
Yeah. You want to ask it again, or
Sure.
you want me to
Yeah.
say it?
What was your favorite childhood memory?
I think some of the vacations we took before my parents got divorced, like one, we were in Jamaica and we're staying at a house and we had a cook and basically the daughter of the cook I played with and just some sweet things like that.
That's nice. Yeah, we took a couple of family trips to Jamaica. It's a beautiful place. What is your favorite meal?
My favorite meal is something that's basically organic. I mean, it can be definitely some kind of meat and vegetable. So I'm not too picky, but chicken or I do eat beef, and then some kind of vegetables that are fresh and organic.
Oh, so that's really basic. You're wide open there.
I'm pretty wide open on that. Yeah.
Wow. Normally people have like a very specific thing. I can never decide, truth be told. Um, everybody's different. What one piece of advice would you like to give your younger self?
I'd say be easier on yourself. Be not so hard on yourself. Have more compassion on yourself.
You think you were hard on yourself growing up?
I was hard on myself, not growing up so much, but basically like when I got into my healing process, and I was very hard on myself. A lot of high expectations.
Okay. All right. Maybe we'll get into that because that's intriguing me. High expectations. I have to remember that. Okay. What's one thing that you would most like to change about the world?
I would like to change uh, the blame that is everywhere, and have people live more in recognition of their unity and gratitude uh, for who they are and recognize who they are as divine beings.
What do you mean by that?
Well, basically, we obviously the appearance of the world has not been too good recently. It's been
Mm-hmm.
very polarized, and so I think if people can recognize, and that's not a lot of what's in the book. We talk about recognizing those patterns which create fear in us and don't serve us. And if we can recognize those and release those, then we'll come more into recognition of our divinity, and then we'll see more from a unity standpoint versus a separation standpoint,
Yeah,
more from a standpoint of we versus us and them.
I think I know what you mean. When I was younger, like in the 70s when I was a kid, 70s and 80s when I was a kid, it seemed to be that there was much more of a sense of community in neighborhoods and that people were not were friends and friendly and sort of involved in each other's lives, and the kids were all of a certain age, give or take. And now, like, I've been living in this house for 12 years and I only know like one neighbor to the direct west of me, and nobody knows anybody else. There's like no
Yeah,
sense of community beyond the structure imposed by the school district,
yeah.
and
Yeah,
it's kind of
that's
sad.
definitely part of it. Yeah, it is sad. It's definitely part of it. But also, I'm talking about a lot of polarization that's happening within politics or
Yes.
religion or other things like that.
Yeah. We're much more quick to blame the other and not have interest or compassion or empathy for things that don't involve us.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I see that a lot. It's extremely sad. Okay, so you just wrote this book in 2020 called The Book on Fear: Feeling Safe in a Challenging World, which is available on Amazon. You want to tell us about your book?
Sure, it's a book that actually brings us to a more of a treetop perspective in terms of understanding what our fears are, how they were created, what beliefs are supporting them, what conditioning created those beliefs, and then using a lot of information from basically psychology, spirituality, philosophy, quantum physics, to help us see from a different, more of a treetop perspective versus having our head kind of buried into the trunk of the tree at the bottom.
Okay, so we're on top of it looking down to get
We're
an
on top of it.
overview.
Yeah, we're on top of it looking down and also looking more at the forest so we can see just, we're taking our perspective to a much higher level.
Okay, so what are you talking about in the book on fear? You in the beginning talk about the fact that you're an expert on fear, that most people who write nonfiction books are experts in something. So what
Mm-hmm.
makes you an expert in fear?
Because I have gone through a tremendous amount of emotional healing process, also spiritual, what I call spiritual healing process. And as part of that, the emotional healing process was a coming back from or healing from sexual abuse by my mother, which happened during puberty, which was I came out of that experience with a lot of fear, a lot of guilt, shame, anger.
Sure.
And then
I'm
once I
sorry.
entered into, thank you, once I entered into an emotional healing process, there's just a lot of beliefs and a lot of things that I had to release that created a lot of fear in me, and was able to, and so I really became, I understood at a deep level how fear is created by our beliefs and what we need to do to try and get out of that. And when you see all this like polarization in the world, it's coming from fear. So
Yeah.
I can
Oh yeah.
see I can see all of the patterns that are happening, and basically what I hope the book does is it helps people to begin to question, why are the relationships, why do they interact with life in the way they do? Because so many people are, interacting in an unhealthy or dysfunctional way. And I think a lot of people recognize that. And then basically to say, I want to change that. Now, how do I change that? So I give them a lot of the tools in the book to be able to see where it's coming from and how they need to change that.
Like tools like what? Like if somebody was to say, okay, so I'm feeling afraid. Like I grew up and my mom was narcissistic. She was an undiagnosed bipolar. She was a drug addict. Got more intense as she got older. So she was an opioid addict, which completely changed the whole like topography of her personality. And I grew up like being really
Uh-huh.
afraid of her explosiveness and her explosive temper and her explosive bitterness. That's like the sharp edges of the negative side of the bipolarity. When I was a kid, I used to call her Cruella de Vil when she was in those stages because I didn't know what other language there was. And when she was
Right.
on the high manic mania portion of the bipolarity, she was Snow White or Mary Poppins. Um, but she was
Right.
far more often was on the Cruella de Vil side. Far more often was unpredictable and volatile and selfish and dismissive of me and critical. And I I not only grew up as like a chronic people pleaser because I took it upon myself to try to make her happy. Like I couldn't think of anything else to do except to try to minimize or mitigate the sharp edges of the Cruella de Vil side in hopes, because what did I know as a kid, in hopes of trying to swing the pendulum into the happier direction. And I grew up
Uh-huh.
like really afraid of, I wasn't sure what. And it wasn't until I was an adult, a young adult, but an adult in therapy, that I figured out that really the bulk of my fear came from a fear of abandonment and isolation, and a fear that I really was unworthy of love, like she would say when she was in the downside of
Right.
the negative side of the bipolarity. So what kinds of tools does your book or the HUSO sound therapy offer somebody who's feeling that way?
So, you've obviously come a long way because you have a great recognition of how the conditioning you went through, and what it created in you, and then you can choose to, release that. So, the first thing, but for a lot of people, they don't understand exactly what their fears are. And in order to solve a problem, you first have to understand what that problem is. So a lot of people they may understand that they have a fear over dying in a pandemic or losing their job or not having a significant other. But certainly there's a lot of fears that run underneath the surface, kind of like a virus of a computer, and affect the operation of us. And we're not aware of a lot of those fears. So like many people probably have a fear of abandonment, or they have a fear of not meeting others' expectations or their own expectations. They may have a fear of not being successful. Somebody who on the surface may know that they have a fear of not having a significant other, may have a fear that they're not an underlying fear that they're not lovable or worthy, a belief of that. So, and then there's certainly
and that may cause them to make less than appropriate decisions with regard to their romantic life. Like they might settle for things, or not put themselves in certain situations that might work out to be fruitful because they're afraid of what's going to happen.
Absolutely. I mean, these are like computer viruses, that these beliefs, they run and they affect us, and so they create a lot of dysfunction in our life. The other fear I was going to mention that obviously we all hold, especially as we age, is what's going to happen at death. Right. What our belief system is around some kind of a God or higher power or whatever that is. And so we've been conditioned. We've been conditioned in childhood. We've been conditioned societally. There's a chapter on societal conditioning. We've been conditioned by religion. We've been conditioned in the workplace. And the way that we see our conditioning is to watch our emotions and reactions. And so, and this is called basically mindfulness, which everybody is aware of that term. But Carl Jung, who's the father of analytical psychology, said that projection is one of the most common phenomenon. So we're usually not angry for the reasons we think. Behind anger is fear, could be guilt, sadness, judgment. So we're usually projecting. Like when we judge others, it's a projection of our self-judgment. When we're blaming others, it's a projection of our guilt. And if we can start to witness our emotions and reactions, pull those projections back in, and then see what beliefs are supporting those, supporting that, and then we can tie those back to the conditioning, that happened. Like we can say, oh, maybe I understand that my mom was like this, so I have a fear of abandonment, and that's why I cling to people. I cling to men in relationships instead of having a healthy relationship. So once we start to shine the light of awareness on all of these things, we can begin to heal them. We can choose, and then there's some other steps. That's the first step.
Yeah. And how does a person, I mean, I'm sure it's very idiosyncratic, as many people as there are who feel these things. There are probably very different ways of getting yourself to that point of figuring out what the basis is of the fear.
I mean, we have multi-layered fears. So we hold some fears individually that are unique to us, and others hold them, individually, but they're not. There's other individuals that don't hold those, and then we have collective fears that we, so like the fear of death is the collective fear that a large majority of people hold. Right now, there's a collective fear over, it's been over basically the pandemic. So there's a lot of collective fears we hold, and it's fear is multi-layered, so we have to start to kind of peel back the layers of the onion to see what those fears are, and then then we can say I don't choose this anymore. And once we basically say to the universe, I want to heal this and I don't choose this anymore, the universe really kicks into action to assist us with whatever means there are to do that. So for instance, somebody may go see a therapist, or they may have read a certain book that helps them, or they may have conversations with a friend. There's all of our fears are stored. Our fears are both energetic, and they're psychological, and they're cellular, so they're stored in the body. And so the way that we bring out of all of our trauma and fears in our body is to practice things that basically place us in the now and also place us in the body.
Right.
So that can be things like, being in nature, meditation, yoga, dance, art, painting, whatever it is that puts us into our body and into the now. So I do have as a little bit segue talking about the now, I do have a chapter speaking about quantum physics, actually a couple chapters. And so basically science has proven that time is not fixed. It's not linear. So how we see time through an ego lens is not real. But basically only the present moment exists. But what happens is a lot of people, basically they live in the past or they live in the future, mostly in the future. And so we worry about things that are likely not to happen, but we're creating fear, um, that's unnecessary. And if we can pull our attention back to the moment and be in that moment, everything is okay and there's not fear there.
Totally makes sense. Absolutely makes sense. I know that throughout my life, without knowing what I was doing, I was actually intuitively doing that. And that's where I've been keeping journals since 1983. And that became my way of processing what was going on, trying to make sense out of the things that I didn't know how to make sense out of. And I poured out everything that was in my head and everything that was in my heart out onto the paper. And sometimes I would even somehow bypassed my cognitive brain and it went straight from my amygdala probably to the paper,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'd go back and read what I wrote and it was almost like it had been written by somebody else,
Uh-huh.
oh my God, that's really what's going on. It was really kind of weird, but it allowed me to really process what was happening. And then years later, after my divorce, I mean, I was still writing this whole time, but I picked up a paintbrush and I started painting again for the first time since college and discovered that I'm actually an artist.
Yeah.
And a visual artist, not just a textual artist,
Right.
and painting for me became very meditative. And I didn't really know this going in. I just started painting. But what I found was that I was really in the moment, that I was patient in a way that I wasn't ever before. Because if you rush a painting, you ruin it. If you try to do too much, the colors get all muddy. You have to do it in stages. You have to do it
Right.
slowly. You have to let the underlayers dry before you can continue. And it taught me to sort of step back and to stop projecting into the future. And it really was a magical leap to apply that as a metaphor for other things. And it was really very organic and beautiful. It reminded me kind of what you were talking about in your chapter, Energetics and Unity, where you're talking about manifesting what you wanted. Like you said, that feeling the fear or ruminating in the fear is a choice, and that you don't have to always think into the future or ruminate over the past, but to be in the now. I was hoping you could talk a little more about that because it's very intriguing to me. You hear it all over in lots of different ways. Like people will say the secret, which is basically the same thing as manifesting and energy and what you call universal law 101.
Well, first off, I want to say congratulations. What you just described about, especially with the journal writing, is really powerful. That's a really powerful way of releasing things. So, some people may not need to see a therapist, or, there's just different ways. And like I know my son, our son is a big journaler, and that helps him to get a lot of stuff out. And then what you were talking is interesting because you were talking about the process and
Ooh,
like
internet is weird.
emotional healing process. Um, that can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah.
You still okay? Yeah, the emotion, the pain process is so much like the emotional healing and spiritual healing process because it's in layers, and you have to wait on it, and you
Yeah.
have to wait for the next thing to come into place. And God and the universe know the perfect path for you, and all you have to do is trust and be carried along with it.
Mm-hmm.
But in talking about the now, the now is a very powerful place to be. That's actually our natural state. But
Right.
we're so distracted in this, especially in Western society. And a lot of people, and I talk about this in the book, a lot of people just don't want to be still. They're afraid of what they're going to find when they're still. So they're always busying themselves with, looking at something on their phone or the internet,
They don't
or
know how to
doing
just sit with themselves and just be
so.
still and listen to their inner heart and the whispers of their heart. They can't do it.
They're afraid of doing it, and so
Yeah.
they don't do it. So, but that's the greatest journey you can ever take, to know thyself. Socrates, Jesus, and a lot of wise people basically said, know thyself, which means to and it's be still and know that I am God. It's all the same thing, and that's how you can then begin to discover all your hidden beliefs and fears and everything. And then, once you start to release all those things and say those things don't serve me anymore, it's the most, joyful and peaceful way. It's just an amazing process.
Yeah. And then you just let it go. And then suddenly all that cacophony in your head is just calm. It just quiets down.
Yeah, you have basically we have. And I don't like to. It's I don't like to describe this because it's one. It's all one. But most people are very much completely in their ego thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But we have a much higher level of thinking that's within us, that comes from our heart and comes from our intuition and our gut, and is stored in the body. And that's where the divine resides. And once we start to be still, the ego mind will start to calm down some. And then you're going to start to have some of these higher thoughts that come from that higher space, that you can then access. And that's where you want to make your decisions from.
Yeah, because they're grounded in what actually is and not projections of your fear or your concern, worry, or over concerns about what might happen.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, I love the phenomenon of freeing my brain up when I'm meditating, sitting still and quiet and listening inward, or painting, which for me is almost the same thing. Um, and suddenly things that were confusing or cloudy or just mired in a whole lot of other icky stuff, things that I don't really, they're just too sticky to be clear, suddenly become clear. And a new path to thinking about something just opens up, like, oh my God, that was just obvious all along, but it wasn't.
That's just it's very beautiful. I mean, the process, I never tire of the process. It's a very holy and beautiful process. Most of us just fight it. I mean, we just fight it, and we don't realize how beautiful it is, and how amazing this world is, to be, in communion with others, with nature, and to see the unity of all things, and to be in that flow that you just mentioned, because
Right.
it's right there for us, and that's our natural state.
Why do you think everybody gets so bogged down with everything else?
Well, I think it's the nature of society, that we're now very technological society, and there's nothing wrong with technology. There's nothing good or bad about anything in the universe. It's how it's used. Unfortunately, technology, and I do have a chapter in the book, later in the book, about technology,
Mm-hmm.
and about some of the quote bad things about technology. And so, but we just uh, there's a part of society that thinks technology is the savior of everything, and that's just not true. I mean, technology is here to be a tool, to be an
Right.
aid for us, but it's not here to be a savior. And so the indigenous tribes lived for a very long time before the industrial age, in terms of having uh, basically an experience here on earth that was just incredible, and having an experience of the creator, and having immense joy, having community. And we tend to think that there's all this stuff that we need to buy, like new iPhone, or new house, and we have to earn all this money. So we've been conditioned by Western society to say that we should achieve the American dream and have all this stuff. And that's just like, I use the example in the book about the gerbil on the wheel just churning and churning
Yeah.
and not having a destination. We don't even know where that destination, nobody can even say what that destination is when they reach the destination or why they're going to that destination.
Right. We just have all these corporations wanting to increase their bottom line. And so they instill in us all these fears that we have all these deficits, that we're not enough, that we need just this sexy car and you'll get everything you want. You need this lipstick and you'll get the man of your dreams. You need, whatever it is, from the littlest little thing to a huge expense. But they're constantly telling us and trying to instill fear so that we purchase things.
That's very well put. And that's basically what I put in the book. Basically, we're being told we're not good enough as is.
Right.
And so, the message, the message from the angelic realm, the message from God, the message from the universe is we are good enough as is. Okay. It's like we're the
more
ones
than
judging.
Enough as it is.
Yeah. We're the ones judging ourselves as not good enough. And we are, we're basically, and I use this example in the book too, we're perfect as is. It depends, we have a very weird definition of perfection, but we're basically spirit expressing in a human body and having a human experience, and we're here to learn, evolve, and grow, and help others do the same. And so, and that's holiness right there. So
that's the whole nature of this podcast: to learn, evolve, and grow. Permission to heal. We have to give ourselves permission to take the time and the space that we need to find peace and love within ourselves and share it out with the world.
Yeah.
I'm an English teacher, so I do that all the time.
Yeah, you're doing that. I mean, you're doing that with the podcast. So, and I'm trying to do that with the book. And so
exactly,
people are being called to do that. People, especially people who are willing to face their fears, to face their traumas, to heal from that stuff. Those are the ones that are bringing the light, because the light's in all of us. It's just covered up with for most people, it's covered up with a bunch of crap, a bunch of
unresolved trauma and unprocessed fears, and
but the sun's there. It's just covered up with clouds for most people. But when we start to pull that aside, then that's the beauty, that's the holiness, the light that's within.
Absolutely. It's the whole intention that I had. I wrote my memoir based on my experience with my mom and my search for closure after she died 7 years ago. And I went back to my journals and I used all of my writing. I read everything from 1983 on forward and used the words of the 15, 16, 17-year-old version of me as primary source documents when trying to make sense out of my life, taking a long view back. So we're not looking at the 52-year-old's memory of what happened in 1984, but what did the 16-year-old think about this in 1984? And how does that make sense? Like, I was trying to figure out why I behaved certain ways, what patterns I could come up with my own behavior, and how to heal myself and forgive myself for being human, really, but for making quote unquote mistakes along the way that were triggered by these fears that I received from or developed in response to my mom's and my dad's and the world's treating of me or behavior. And it was hard. My husband will tell you, it was a rocky 6 months when I was writing the first draft.
Yeah, I bet.
Through.
But kudos to you, because it's a hard process, and a lot of people aren't willing to go through that.
Right.
But the thing that I say to people is, look, you're literally in a prison cell of your own making. Do you want to? You're your own jailer. Do you want to? Do you want to open it up and walk out? And so there's a lot of light on the opposite side of that jail cell.
Absolutely. And I absolutely wanted to make sure, at least for my own family, that I did whatever I could to end the intergenerationality of mental illness and addiction.
Hmm.
I wanted my children to grow up as unaffected by this as possible. And the moment that I hit bottom, so to speak, with this, with my mom, was this one fight we had in 2011 that I talk about extensively in my book. It's in the beginning chapter. And it was the moment, one pinpointed moment, where I stopped being the scared, dutiful, forever sublimating her own feelings, people pleasing, supplicating at the queen, so to speak, daughter. And like a light switch, Larry, I became the lioness queen mama, defending her den
Huh.
and her cubs. And it was literally like that, just like a snap of the fingers. And it changed everything for me on a dime, and ended that previous dysfunction and put me on a new path. uh,
That's awesome.
and and it was a crystal clear moment. I mean, a moment of crystal clear clarity that I had never had before. I was just mired in all of this mud, and I couldn't see my way out of it, And then suddenly it was there, and I just had to act on it. I had to choose to act on it.
I mean, that's amazing. It's like you can just that's just tremendous growth, and and you and everybody around you, especially your kids, are so much better for that.
Absolutely, absolutely. I just ended the whole thing there, and and they were great. And then about a year and a half later, I mean, I was fine, the kids were fine, I was in therapy, I got the kids in therapy, everything. We had to work through all of this stuff. And I didn't talk to my mother again ever. And then she died a
Mm.
year and a half later, and I was really sort of tasked at that point with figuring out how to forgive her, because I was the only one who, nobody would deliver a eulogy. And even though I was the only child and I had all of this baggage and 40 some odd years of, stuff to shovel through, I had to figure out how to eulogize her.
Yeah,
And I couldn't just say nothing. Like, I
yeah,
had enough respect for my family and enough respect for her friends and our extended cousins and so on, and enough respect for her, because I know that she was never malicious. I realized that always. I knew she wasn't doing any of the things that she did once I was past childhood and I was a teenager. At least I knew she wasn't doing any of the things that she did out of malice. She just didn't
right.
have the tools to do it better. She
Hmm.
didn't have the tools to live her life better. And she had her own issues, and I won't even bore any of you with what I think they were, because it's just projection anyway. I have no way of determining that. Um, but the hardest thing was forgiveness. It took me a long time to come to a place where I was magnanimous enough to realize her humanity and frailty and just let that go.
That's great.
Um, how do you help people, or what do you suggest to people who are looking to either forgive themselves or forgive others for wrongdoing?
I mean, there's a chapter in the book on forgiveness. So,
I know, I'm
you
looking
know,
at it now.
forgiveness is forgiveness is something that you would say. First off, you have to look back and you have to say that um, you shouldn't have any. Like I should not have any regrets or feel any type of guilt for what happened to me when I was 12 or 13. Okay. And the same for you. We were children. We did the best we could. Um, I think with forgiveness, we can look and say, um, if the situation had been reversed, would we want forgiveness from the person? And I think in most cases we would. The example I use in the talk about in the book is like when we don't forgive somebody, it's actually harder on us than it is on them because
Because
we
we're
think
holding on to it.
yeah, because we think that we're punishing them by somehow not forgiving them, and we're punishing ourselves because forgiveness opens our heart and lets us be free of that energetic connection that was created by whatever they did. So that's certainly with somebody else. With ourselves, again, we've all don't think there's anybody walking the earth who's, if they're honest, they're going to say, I made mistakes. Okay, we've all made mistakes. We've all done things that we wish we would have done differently. But I was talking to somebody this morning, and I was saying, there's things that when I was younger, you know, that I wish I would have done differently, but I wasn't at the place I'm at now to be able to have the information or be able to have the consciousness to be able to do those things differently. So I look back on that and like, that's why I don't have any guilt or anything I did, or,
Right.
there's things I would, if I could do them differently, I would choose to do them differently, but I'm not gonna bash myself. And so that's been a big change in me the last couple of years in terms of just having forgiveness. If I do something that's a little bit askew, like with my wife, or something I don't pay, I'm not present or whatever it is, or I raise my voice, I'll just say I'm sorry.
Right.
And so saying you're sorry is a very powerful thing, because it's acknowledging like, hey, I did this, I'm sorry, I'm going to try and do it better the next time. So forgiveness is a process.
Absolutely. And it's ongoing. It's
Yeah.
ongoing. I was having a conversation with my husband a couple of weeks ago. I don't really remember exactly what it was, but I was asking him a question about why he did a certain thing, and then he said that it was he changed his behavior because the last time, I really wish I remembered more clearly what it was, but I remember him saying the last time he did X, Y, and Z, I had such a negative reaction to it that he changed his behavior and started doing it a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really even remember having gotten so upset. First of all, my memory's like Swiss cheese, lots of little unpredictable holes in it.
Mine is too.
Oh, God. But I think that my reaction towards whatever it was that he did was triggered by an old wound.
Mm-hmm.
That when I'm being my best elevated self,
Mm-hmm.
it wouldn't bother me. But somehow it triggered something old from my first marriage or from my childhood or something. And it was that younger me that lashed out and was hurt.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until we had this conversation, and it was just a couple of weeks ago, that one residual piece kind of got healed and scabbed over.
Yeah.
And I think that happens unpredictably throughout our lifetimes. I don't think that anyone is done with this process. I think like you could reach a plateau and think, all right, I've done enough for now that I can live in a better way and see more light and so on. But stuff's going to get triggered. Do you agree?
Yeah. I mean, I think that unless you're like Jesus or Buddha or something like that,
Clearly
for
I'm
the
not.
for the vast majority of people, it is I mean, and that for them it's a continual process, but it was more like they moved out of the emotional. I don't know what type of emotional healing they did, but they were more of a spiritual, process. So for me, it's both an emotional and a spiritual journey. And you do basically, what happens is it's kind of like a spiral. And so, what seems to me is that you work on something and you're moving to a higher level, but you kind of spiral back down a little bit because you're picking up threads. Sometimes they're big threads because you haven't worked enough on it. Sometimes they're little threads, and you move up to a little bit higher level. So the spirals kind of keep going up, and
Mm-hmm.
in the sense, and it's not really linear as I'm describing it, but you're also spiraling back down.
It's
So
very interesting. I'm interrupting you for 1 second that you're talking about
yeah,
a spiral, because when I imagine things like this, I imagine it like a double helix, like DNA, and it's definitely
uh-huh.
like two interconnected spirals. I've never heard somebody describe it like that except myself. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, continue. I
Uh,
just, wow.
uh, yeah, but but it is a process. And so what we've asked for, most of if we're lucky, we come to a point. If we're fortunate, we come to a point where we understand kind of why we're here, what we've asked for at a spirit level, and then and what's being triggered, and why it's being triggered, so that we can release certain things and move to a higher level of consciousness. obviously a lot of people are asleep and they're not at that level. Some people are in the middle level. Some people are more advanced level in terms of understanding, what their core issues are and how they get triggered. And so the universe is just assisting us in what we've asked for, which is to learn, evolve, and grow, move to a higher consciousness. And so in order to do that, we're not being punished when we feel like crap again. We're basically just having something come up so that we can, maybe let it go for good.
Yeah. Yeah. Stuff just bubbles up and you have to choose to deal with it or not. Hopefully we choose to deal with it and then we can work towards resolving it or forgiving ourselves or others or so on. Do you take the courageous path?
Yeah. The courageous, the warrior path people deal with it, and there's a large number of people who just choose to medicate it with, drugs and alcohol, food, porn, right. Whatever, internet, whatever it is. It is, there's a lot. People just try to stuff it.
Oh yeah, I'm an emotional eater. I'm like a third generation emotional eater. We take this stuff seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah. The pandemic was crazy for that because there was a lot of helplessness, can't control anything except social distancing and masking and staying home and cleaning the groceries and all this other stuff that they had us doing over the period of time over the year,
right.
But beyond that, it was just, well, what's going to happen? Very bizarre. Just got my vaccination a week ago Wednesday. So this Wednesday will be my 2 weeks, and it'll finally take effectiveness. So It was the 1-dose Johnson & Johnson, so I don't have to get a second dose. So I feel a little better. Take some proactive control.
Yeah.
So going back to forgiveness, I mean, you had a pretty dramatic, tumultuous childhood. As you sort of talked about with abuse. How do you survive that kind of horrific abuse and find forgiveness? How do you get that? That seems like Herculean to me.
Well, I mean, it also seems a little bit Herculean to me in terms of what you went through. So I hear other people's experiences, and I don't like try and compare. It just seems like, okay, that person was really traumatized, or this person, is really traumatized. And so for me, and I think I write something in the book about this, like every time, if I've got something in there, like non-forgiveness is like a poison inside of me. It just doesn't feel good to me. I don't want it to be there. So right. It was a process. I mean, I didn't see my mom she's passed away for like 15 years, but I didn't see her when I was going through this. I didn't see her for like a year or something like that. And then she wasn't in a place where I could really talk to her about it. And it just comes down to a choice of what it is you want. Do you want to just be free of something, or do you want to just keep churning the same trauma over and over? Okay. You have to churn the trauma over and over a little bit to kind of get the roots out and kind of bring it up so you understand how it's affected you. But I think a lot of people stay, and I discuss this in the book as well, a lot of people stay in victim mode. And so they want to be known. Like, I don't want to be known as a sexual abuse victim. Okay. I mean, that's in the bio because the publicist put it there or whatever, but I guess that's sensationalism or whatever.
But it also gets to the heart of the fact that you're an expert on what you're an expert on. That you can't sort of become an expert without context.
Right. Yeah, but I don't want to be known as, I want to be known as a kind individual who loves God, loves his family, tries to be of service.
Right.
And what happened to me was an experience that occurred. It's not my identity. It's not who
Absolutely.
I am.
You are more than your past. Yeah.
Yeah. So these are just, and actually, I believe we are divine beings. And a lot of scientists talk about multidimensional realities. I believe we're multidimensional beings. And so we come to this earth experience for a certain reason, as we've discussed. And so we choose the experiences that we are likely to have. I mean, it wasn't necessarily true that my mom was going to abuse me, although she was abused. So it was probably likely. And I probably chose that with the purpose of working out certain things that I need at a spirit level to 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 have the path that I want to have on this life.
Yeah. So it's living with intentionality. It's choosing the path that you want and choosing your own sanity and your own just hit the microphone. Choosing your own sanity and your own health, mental health and physical health over that of something else.
Yeah, once I started the healing process, and I saw the joy and peace and non-depression and non-anger that was possible. I'm like, okay, I want this really bad, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a close friend of mine who had a childhood that you could describe as similar to yours. And she had a very hard time for very many years finding peace in her own life because she kept ruminating on the victimhood thing and the anger toward her parent. And it took a very long time of therapy and mindfulness and success in her own life. I think she had to sort of prove to herself that she could be quote unquote normal, that she could be healthy and have relationships and set goals for herself and actually fulfill them. And she could see herself as, self actualized in a way before she could finally let go of the anger. And, I'm not her, so I don't know if she has completely, but all I can tell is from the outside, she looks pretty darn healthy right now when a few years ago did not,
Yeah.
And I'm thrilled that she's been able to work through a lot of that. To me, you actually talked about that Robert Frost quote, "The best way out is always through," from that poem of his. I always forget the title of the poem, but the only way out is through has become sort of a mantra for me. I had it actually tattooed on my arm.
Oh, that's cool. Okay.
And my daughter did too. Like we just have this thing, we talk about it all the time. You can't leave the problem to fester and throw it in the corner of your room and bury it with laundry. It's our crazy metaphor. Eventually it's gonna come out and rear its ugly head in an unpredicted way. So
Right.
This comes from my purposeful unlearning of my childhood stuff with my mom. So we deal with it right now while it's fresh. We don't let it scab over. We don't hide it under the laundry. The only way out is through. If we're going to have a fight or we're going to disagree, we're doing with it now. Maybe you need to take a half an hour and calm down so that we get out of that cortisol fueled panic, but then we're going to talk about it.
Right.
And
right.
And it works. I mean, it's a pain in the ass, but it works. This was a lovely conversation. You've written other books too. You have three others.
They're basically it's been a while on those books. This one, I'd say definitely if somebody's interested in anything I'm writing, start with this one.
Yeah.
And then you can see the other books like on Amazon, because this book is, for me, was just what I call energetically much more tight and extremely well edited and just a lot more powerful.
It was a very powerful book. You could see a lot of your heart and soul was in here. That's awesome.
Thank you.
And you and I both wrote articles for Thrive Global. I just had a couple of things published. That was also interesting, how we can accept and embrace change in our lives, which is always a good thing to have. Very cool. Thank you so much for being here, Larry. This was wonderful.
Thank you for having me on, Marcy. I enjoyed it.
I'm so glad. This was a great conversation. I am going to link into the show notes the links to buy your book and your website and how people can get in contact with you if they have questions or whatever. And that'll all be in the show notes. So if you're looking at this on your phone or your computer or your tablet, if you just scroll down on the page, you'll see all the show notes there. If you're on the website, obviously you'll see it. So welcome to thank you for being here for Permission to Heal, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
You too, Marcy. Take care.